I'm Dave Greenwood, and this is Overcoming Distractions. If you are an adult with ADHD, a busy professional, an entrepreneur, a high achiever, or just need some strategies to navigate your adult ADHD, you're in the right place. Who am I? I'm an entrepreneur with ADHD and the author of 2 books, Overcoming Distractions and Overcoming Burnout. I coach and mentor people just like you, and together we navigate the ups and downs of adult ADHD. From getting out of our own way to helping people just like you thrive in the workplace. That's what I do. Want more info on working with me? Hit overcomingdistractions.com. Ready? Let's get to today's podcast. All right, everybody, welcome back. You have once again hit the button to listen to Overcoming Distractions. And if you are that busy professional that just happens to have ADHD, whether you are the CEO or the entrepreneur, you have landed in the right place. So we are going to just get right to it, because I think, we're talking about communication today. And I know some of the challenges that we have, whether we have ADHD or not, I think are rooted in communication, whether it's coworkers, our boss or supervisor, maybe it's clients, maybe it's family members, whoever you need to communicate with. I think some of us do have some challenges with that. It could be expectations with clients. It could be productive conversations with colleagues, asking for accommodations in the workplace, maybe without disclosing, and you need to kind of figure out how to word that properly. Or maybe it's just your regular check-ins with clients or supervisors, whatever it is. I think we can all learn a lot from our guest today. It's Chuck Wisner. He's president of Wisner Consulting. He has a client list that includes companies such as Google, Apple, Tesla, Harvard Business School, Ford, Chrysler. He is affiliated with the Mediator and Harvard Mediation Program, among countless other credentials. And he's the author of The Art of Conscious Conversations, Transforming How We Talk, Listen, and Interact. And isn't that kind of what communication is all about, is talking, listening, and interacting?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So,
pretty much it in a nutshell.
Yeah. All right, we're done.
What more to say?
What more to say? Yeah, you got the podcast, folks. So, well, welcome. I'm so glad that I was able to have you on here, because, like I said, it is a challenge, and it's something that comes up a lot when I work one-on-one with people. And I'm not the expert, but you are. So, but before we kind of dig into that, can you tell us briefly about some of the work you're involved in right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me, by the way. Happy to be here. I'm sort of changing gears. Writing my book was my 4th career. So, music was my first, architecture was my second, consulting my third, and writing my book. So I'm changing gears a bit. I'm doing less with large companies. I'm working more with individual leaders to really focus on their particular stuff. And so I have I have a handful of clients, and I have a little space for taking on some more, but that's where I'm focusing. That I really am enjoying the one-on-one transformational work.
Yeah, that's great. So in your experience, do you feel a lot of people in the workplace, those professional settings, struggle with effective communication? Is there a lot of challenges in that area for people?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's the it's the root of bad meetings. It's the root of miscommunication. It's the root of a lot of people's frustrations with their leaders. And so there are these. What I'm trying to do with my book. There are multiple books on conversations, crucial conversations, who are people that live here near me in Boston. But what I try to do is take a fresh look and say, wait a minute, we grow up learning how to talk and converse through our families and our cultures, like we adopt the patterns, we adopt the habits of all of that pretty much unconsciously. And then depending on how our brain works and how we're wired, it works or it doesn't work, and it's more difficult or less difficult for some people. But fundamentally, we don't really understand how conversations work. So in the book, I distinctly talk about 4 different kind of conversations, their value, and the reason I take them apart is so we can have a better understanding of how conversations work and why they break down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get into the field of like communication and conversations?
Yeah, I was an architect in Boston, Cambridge area, and great profession, uh, tough training, great profession. But we had a partner who became an alcohol or was an alcoholic, and as we grew, he became a problem, and we didn't know what to do, so we hired in help. And the woman that came in, her name was Linda Reed, just like magically, from my eyes, magically helped us understand what was going on, take it apart, help us unravel it and put it back together again. And I've always had a philosophical, psychological interest and spiritual interest. And so what she did felt like magic to me. And so I started working with her and learning, and I just got addicted to this. And in the course of 4 years, I studied mediation. I studied the ontology of language, and then after 4 years, I left architecture and started on leadership, communication, and transformational change.
That's quite a
So
swing.
yeah, yeah, it is a swing, but actually, architecture is a great training for taking complex ideas, many complex things, and putting them together in a simple way. And so sometimes I can look at an organization's or a person's sort of way of looking at things and go, oh, well, here's how we can connect the dots. And sometimes if you're so in it, you can't see that. So
That
there's
would
a
make
link
sense.
there,
Yeah. Yeah.
tenuous, but a link. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I can actually see that. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so as you know, that this audience is, that busy professional with ADHD. Again, they could be a solopreneur, they could be a CEO, they could be in middle management.
Right.
And I think there there are some ADHD traits involved with communication and growing up with ADHD and all those things that we could spend hours talking about.
Yeah.
But I think there are some situations, I know when I work with people where there are some, I would say, from tough to just a necessary conversation that needs to take place. But I also think
Right.
some of them maybe don't go right. So,
Mm-hmm.
in your experience doing this, what are some of the possible mistakes that you see, um, you know, over and over again when it comes to communicating, say, in the workplace? I'm sure you've seen this.
Oh yeah. 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 So possible mistakes, multiple mistakes. One, it starts mistakes we make as individuals, right? Starts by having a look at what's going on for us internally when we're trying to have a conversation. And whether you have ADHD or don't, or whatever you are, wherever you are in whatever spectrum, um, we all have a very strong internal conversation, which in linguistics we call it the private conversation versus our public conversation. And because of our way of learning patterns of speech and communicating, is becomes we become on autopilot, and often that private conversation is playing a very big role in how we show up or how we don't show up in a conversation. So really understanding that our internal dialogue is full of judgments, and when we start to understand that and we take a good look at it without being judgmental on ourselves or negative about ourselves. When we take a good look at it, I break it down into 4 components. There's 4 basic components with our private conversation that we have to process. It's our desires, which often we're afraid to speak, or maybe we blurt them out at the wrong place at the wrong time, or we don't really have a handle on our desires, like our desires don't line up with reality.
Mm-hmm.
There's power issues, authority issues in every conversation, whether it's your kids, your boss, your colleague, your friend, a social person, a social, like a community thing, like a church. There are concerns that we have. So every time we have a judgment about something, I don't like the way that looks or how he's behaving or what she's doing. Underneath, we have a concern why it matters to us or why it matters to work or why it matters to our goal. And we often forget to speak that. And that's a very good thing to talk about. And then lastly is everything that we judge and everything we are processing is based on standards. So if I don't like something, it's because my expectation of what they should be doing is different than what their expectation is. And that really gets buried deep in our subconscious, and we don't often talk about that. But much miscommunication and sort of passing each other is because we have different standards. But instead of talking about standards, we talk about why you're a jerk. When
well, no, it's interesting because I think a lot of people with ADHD can dig their heels in sometimes. Not everybody, because ADHD, I believe, is a spectrum as well. So there's people who are fearful of a conversation. There are also people that are more than willing to have a conversation that might actually have some consequences. And I think we have some of us have been known to not have the temperament required to maybe navigate, say, a corporate setting. So
yeah. And when we start understanding our private conversations, there's a chapter in my book around our private conversations and how to process them. When we start looking at that, you realize there's 2 basic problems. People either don't know how to process and get their thoughts and concerns and desires out, right? It's all inside, locked up, or they blurt it out.
Yeah.
Which is, a career limiting move.
Well, yeah. Yeah. And I think
that's a spectrum too, from holding it to blurting it, and neither are healthy or productive. Right?
Career limiting is a very diplomatic way of saying that.
So when we process and learn to speak these things, we close the gap between our private conversation and our public conversation. We actually, because the bigger that gap, the more stress we live in. If you imagine you're holding a lot of stuff inside about the jerk you work with or whatever, and then what you say is, it's okay, I'll get right on it, boss. That creates a lot of stress. So the more we can close that gap, the better.
Yeah. And I work with a fair amount of people who have entered that burnout phase as well. And there was a lot of internal dialogue going on in their head, because you've got resentment, you got cynicism, you got all these things,
resignation.
And you do want to tell people what you think. So, and I think in those cases, it's very important to understand because some people might have even taken a medical leave, so to speak, because they got burned out and now they're trying to re-enter. So, so I would think it'd be all the more critical to make sure that you can manage that without, like you say, blurting out what is actually being discussed in your head. Correct?
Yeah. And yes, absolutely. Because when we learn to process it, like, okay, I have a judgment, but if I take the time to go, okay, what am I concerned about? What do I want? What do they want? Is there a power struggle here? And what are my concerns or what are my standards? If we do that, what we find, and I've done this with thousands of people, what we find is while our private conversation feels really negative, and there's all kind of curse words inside of there, like,
Mhm.
right? But it feels negative. But when we really take a look at them, you see there's some really golden nuggets like that become productive that we could bring into a conversation in a healthy way. Like, let me tell you my concern, because I might have a different concern than you do, whether it has to do with my future or the work we're doing or whatever. Or let's compare our standards of what we think good is or what we think success is. And that way we're having a totally different conversation,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
I know some people, again, that I've worked with, they want to ask for, say, an accommodation in the workplace. Um, and we had an episode back, I don't know, a year or so ago, but one of the things, and I forget who I was interviewing, but we came up with, and instead of going in and saying, I need, it was more
Mhm.
of, I could do my job better if I had, because
If
it
I
was a,
had, yes. Right.
yeah, because that shows that you've got some kind of skin in the game, instead of just going in the workplace and demanding that you get a private office and a,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all this stuff. It was a way of softening, but also showing that, yeah, I'm willing to work with you here, instead of just demanding everything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Here's how I think best. Here's how I work best. This is what would make me a better employee. All
yeah,
those are great ways to take those scary conversations and turn them into something healthy.
yeah. Would that be considered what you call a collaborative conversation, where you're trying to work with others in the flow? And because I do know that, again, um, many people with ADHD, they do tend to blurt things out, or they interrupt, or they, and I know there's various reasons for it, whether it's our impulsivity, or quite frankly, we may just forget what we're going to say, so we got to get it out of our
Yeah.
head now.
Yes.
But
Right.
when you're trying to, legitimately work with somebody, is that what you consider that collaborative conversation?
Yeah, so the collaborative conversation is the second one of the four conversations in the book. First is storytelling, then
Yeah.
collaboration, then creative, and then commitment. So the collaborative conversation is really an art form that we're not taught much about.
Hmm.
And to make it at its simplest level is, how do we present our story, our perspective in a healthy way, and how do we inquire into what other people are thinking and feeling, and what their perspective is, in a good way. So it's a balance between advocating for ourselves or for a project or for a goal, and inquiring into other people's perspectives to create mutual learning. Now, the hard part of that sounds really easy. The hard part is, we're all trained to be knowers. We're all trained to have the answer. We're all trained to want to be the one that raises their hand in class to get a gold star because
Yeah.
we have the answer, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to sort of turn that desire down to, like, always have the answer, to say, I have a perspective. Your perspective might be different. You might have different standards. Let's talk this through, and I might learn something from you. You might learn something from me.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a dance. I can't give people a formula, do this first and that, because it's a dance of, maybe you put your perspective out there, or your um, opinion on an issue in a good way. Like, here's why I think this way. Often it's the shift is, well, here's an analogy, I guess. I don't know if it's an analogy or a metaphor. If we go into a conversation with a closed fist and say, this is what we should do, I have a perspective, I'm right, you're wrong, right? That's like a closed fist. Well, that's inviting other closed fists.
Yeah.
So then we're like going, well, screw you, I'm smarter than you, I have a better answer, and then we're in a battle, right? So what I try to do is help people say, well, you do have a perspective, and that's fine. I'm not trying to take it away. But what's driving that perspective? What's underneath that? What are your concerns? What do you want to have happen? Are they aligned with the other person? Back to those four things: standards, concerns, power, and desires, right? If you open your hand and go, here's why I'm thinking this way, that's inviting people into a very different conversation.
Yeah.
It's a
But
little vulnerable for people, scary, but it's inviting into a different conversation.
But isn't vulnerability, and I'm not talking about doing whatever on TikTok, but isn't vulnerability, say in the, in the corporate meeting room, isn't that just part of effective communication and problem solving and moving the needle
A-
forward, or
Absolutely.
yeah,
If I can be a little more humble and say, look, I have a really strong opinion, but I'm willing to share with you why I think this way. That's not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I have to have the right answer. I'm saying I have a perspective. Let me share with you. And then you move, then the other part of the equation is you inquire, like, how do you disagree? What do you think differently? Do you have different standards? And you ask good questions to get, see, if someone else is coming to you with a closed fist, nothing like good questions opens their hand.
yeah,
Like one question, like, well, tell me why you're thinking that way. What are you concerned about? And slowly, if we ask good questions, we get under their perspective and see the thinking underneath.
yeah. You also have the creative conversation, and
Yeah.
there, I think that resonates with those of us with ADHD, because uh many of us are creative, many of us see things that others don't, many of us can figure out how to solve a problem or make something better in a workplace. And I
Mm.
think um that I've run into this scenario a bunch of times in working with people where somebody's in a position, maybe they're lower management, middle management, or wherever they are, where they know they can fix something, but they are prohibited from doing so from people
Mm.
above them. And
Yes.
it's incredibly frustrating because they know deep down that they could fix a certain problem. For example, um, uh, an area of like how work flows through a department or something like that.
Right.
So
Right.
if I'm the person in the workplace who knows I can solve a problem, A, is that part of the creative conversation? But B, um, how do we diplomatically um, get people to I wouldn't say, come into our camp, but how do we how do we
Right.
how do we communicate that better? Because I think
Right. Right.
somebody just going, I know how to fix this, let me fix it, might not be effective. So is there
Right.
a different way to do that?
Yeah. So the trap is this: the four conversations: stories, collaboration, creative, commitment. We love our stories. We're addicted to our stories. Our ego likes our stories. Our ego will tell us we're right all the time. Right. That's a separate picture. Now, commitment conversation is about, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to fix the problem. It's the action conversation, right? We we love both of those. And what I call when if you take any meeting you've been in or any conversation you win where you've been in where it doesn't get resolved very well or people are unhappy or you walk away scratching your head, right? I call that the conversational bypass because we leap from I have an idea that to fix it to here's what we need to do to fix it. The creative conversation and the collaborative conversations are more juicy than that. They're like saying, let's share ideas and think about possible ways of solving the problem together. And if you invite someone into that conversation, it's very different than going in and saying, I have the answer. You won't listen to me, but I have the answer. And here's what we need to do. Right.
Yeah.
So the creative conversation is great. And I think people with ADHD probably have, in some ways, they connect dots in a funny way and they're more intuitive and all those things. Right. So we have to hold our horses a little bit instead of jumping to solving the problem to going, hey, can I talk to you about some of my ideas and why I think they're possible and why I think they might work? Does that
So
make sense?
no, it doesn't. I think so. What you're saying is, instead of just saying I can fix this, somebody has to uh, be willing to present the evidence, so to speak, that this is part of a more comprehensive conversation and communication, right?
Yeah, it's inviting someone to say, can we talk about possibilities instead of talking about the answer.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the thing to be aware of is now here's where the authority and the power dimension comes in, because if you're in a hierarchy, you're stuck in that hierarchy. You're here and you have a couple layers or one layer. Even a CEO has a board, that's their boss, right?
Yeah.
So we have to acknowledge the hierarchy and don't go stepping into a bunch of muck, right? Because we don't like the hierarchy, or we don't like the boss, or whatever. If you don't like it and you're stuck, then we think about, well, how can I get out of this, right? I mean, is this a bad thing for me? But be aware of those power issues, because that's where we can also trip ourselves up and get in trouble.
Yeah. And you bring up a big point, which is again a whole nother conversation. But when those things don't happen, that's when that person begins to doubt whether they actually are in the right place,
Right.
Because they get a sense that they can't contribute anymore. So, and
that's right. And and if you're in a place where, let's say, with a boss that has the judgment around people like you, good luck changing that. I mean, you can do your best. You should always try your best. Yeah. But if you find you're hitting a wall time and time and they have you in a box, think about what other possibilities you have.
Right. And we talk a lot here about control, and there's basically there's two types of control in those situations where there's things you're not going to change, and somehow we've got to be at peace with that. But there are always things that you do have some control over within the workplace, or that and those are the things that we need to focus on, because you're right, you're not going to change a CEO that has developed a culture that this is it, this is the way it's exactly. So and it's just expending more energy than we have trying to actually change that. So and that's exhausting. So
it's better to accept the reality, and that doesn't mean you like it and you become a couch potato. It just means you accept the reality of the situation, because otherwise you slide into resentment. Life shouldn't happen this way. She shouldn't treat me this way. But accept that, okay, that's who they are. What can I do? What can I control? What's possible for me outside of this box?
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah. And the ADHD brain needs purpose and fulfillment. And if we don't get that, then that's when, quite frankly, we start looking. We look for a place or an organization or a business that is going to allow us to have that part of our life, because we will get resentful, we'll check out. So
yeah. And I'd say, just that this thought crossed my mind, so I'll share it. It's for ADHD people. I have a son who's ADHD and I have a wife who's ADD, and an adult son. But to understand the 4 conversations at least gives us a little structure to say, am I in the right conversation at the right time with the right people?
Yeah.
Right. Because if we're just scattered and shooting, we need to step back and go, wait a minute, is this the right conversation?
Yeah. I always love to make sure that people listening can walk away with something that they can implement, whether it's in their personal or professional lives. And I want them to listen to the podcast and go, you know what, I'm gonna try that, or hey, that sounds like me, and I can implement that. So I know one of the things that I think you discussed was that commitment, and I think many of us do commit to things that when we are faced with the situation, realize that was a people-pleasing moment, or I had the inability to say no, and it gets us in trouble. It stresses us out. We overcommit. So,
Yeah.
how can, as we wrap up, and we could spend a whole nother episode on this. Okay?
Yes, we could. Yeah. Well, invite me back. I'll be happy to come back.
I would love, but well, okay, so that'll be a tease. Okay. But if somebody's listening to this and they just heard what we just said and they go, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's me. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a just some simple guidelines that we could end this episode with, for people that are, quite frankly, people pleasers? They have the inability to say no. They say yes too much.
Yeah. So that is such a crucial conversation that we know nothing about it. It's a complex conversation. It's how we make promises. It's how trust is built. It's how distrust happens, right? So the simple thing that we miss is when someone makes a request to us. Number one, realize we're all people pleasers. We all are addicted to yes. The boss whizzes by your desk, says, can you put a presentation together for Monday morning? You say, sure. You spend the weekend doing it. You give it to him Monday, and he says, what is this crap? This isn't what I wanted, right? Because we said yes, we didn't ask any questions. And we couldn't say no because it's our kid's soccer game and I don't have time, right?
Yeah.
There's a middle ground. There's two pieces that are middle grounds. One, clarification of the request. What do you mean by a presentation for Monday morning? For whom? What format? How long? What's the subject, right? That's asking a few questions before we say yes. And then the second piece is a counteroffer. Okay, I understand what you want. And you know what? I can do it for Monday. I like what you're saying, but I think a white paper might be more valuable for your audience than a deck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just made that up, but
right. Yeah.
But a counteroffer is saying, in my experience, I think if we did bullet points, it might be better than writing a novel. Or okay, I get it, what you want, and the deck makes sense. I can't give it to you Monday morning, but I can give it to you Monday afternoon. So that's a counteroffer. And the reason that's okay, unless you have a boss that's a complete jerk, is that you're doing a counteroffer so you can make a better promise.
Yeah.
That you can fulfill. Right?
Yeah.
So that's why. Yeah.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. Yeah. And that's our value bomb for this episode. So thank you so much. So
yeah. Right.
I definitely would love to have you back, because I do want to dig into that, because it's a huge problem for people. So and it comes up over and over again. So where can people find you?
Okay. So LinkedIn, Chuck_Wisner, I think. Instagram, I similar, Chuck_Wisner,
Mm-hmm.
or at Chuck Wisner. My website is chuckwisner.com.
That one's easy.
Yeah, and there's a free link there. Put your email in and you get a PDF of the introduction to the book.
Okay.
And there's also a way to reach out to me and say, I'd like to talk about X, Y, and Z. So whether it's a speaking gig or a podcast, or whether it's to do individual work with people, there's a way to link up with me.
Great. All righty, sir. Well, thank you. That was a very compact conversation, and one that could continue for many episodes. But thank you for just kind of give us an overview of that, and we will definitely have you back. So thank you.
Yeah, and if people enjoyed it, the book is on Amazon. It's easy to find.
Yeah, I'll put the link to that. Yeah, we will have the link to that in the show notes, people. So awesome. All right, thank you so much.